Let's return now to the big economic news of the day, the GDP number, showing continued strong growth in the Australian economy. Innes Willox joins me. He's Chief Executive at the Australian Industry Group. Innes, what do you make of that, the figure today, the headline number? Does it suggest we're going to get through the difficulties right now, the inflationary period, high energy costs? How are your members holding up?
Well, Kieran, it is a strong number and it tells us that the economy has got a lot of resilience built into it. And it's a very positive number, so I think we should be grateful for that, to see that our economy is continuing to grow. Got to remember, though, these are backward-looking numbers and a lot has happened over the past few weeks to maybe make us take pause and think, are we going to get through this? And there are enormous challenges facing the economy at the moment. Inflation, is up. Interest rates are on the rise. There's real continued supply chain blockages, concerns ongoing around the impact of Russia, Ukraine, and a big part of that is energy costs, which we're now seeing go completely through the roof and seeing businesses start to be smashed with that. So we've been resilient until now. We have a lot of challenges ahead, and that's probably where we need to focus, look forward, not in the rearview mirror.
So the gas, wholesale gas price is ballooning. You described it potentially as apocalyptic for industry. Talk us through what they're facing right now in terms of these ballooning costs.
Well, Kieran, I chose that word quite deliberately because it has enormous ramifications for the industrial base and their customers right across Australia. I mean, gas is incredibly important. Households would see it in for their cooking and for their heating. Industry sees it in terms of being a vital feedstock for a lot of the industrial production that we have. Chemicals and fertilisers, just one area, steel is another. You're going to see these prices go up exponentially for business, and businesses are just going to have to either cut back on production, cut back on employment, cut back in investment, or just push the prices through, and in the end households will pay for them. So in Victoria we have seen a 50-fold increase in gas prices from just a couple of years ago. That's 50 times. That's just unbearable for a lot of businesses. So I had a member this morning tell me he'd signed a new contract for 1 year yesterday at 2.7 times what he'd paid in his last contract just ending. If he hadn't signed yesterday, he was told it was going to be 5 times more. And that's just sort of touching the surface. It has huge implications for business and then in turn for households, because households in the end are the ones who are going to pay for it, and businesses are going to have to make some very hard decisions. It is, I would say, Kieran, the number one order issue for the new federal government to address. Some would say it's a perfect storm, but they've got to try to help business and households ride through this storm.
And what do you think, if we look in the short term, that needs to be done? If we look at short and medium, I guess the short term, should the so-called gas trigger be pulled by the government, where exports are limited, are restricted for domestic use to keep a lid on those prices? And then secondly, what sort of reform needs to happen to avoid this volatility?
So, Kieran, I'll take the first one first. That is around what is called the ADGSM, the Australian Domestic Gas Security Mechanism. It's the power the federal government has had since about 2016 to, basically sort of redivert what would be exports to domestic supply. That is very much a last resort option, but I've got to tell you, a lot in industry are turning their minds to that. They don't want to because it has enormous ramifications. We've got contracts to fulfil and the like. It is very much a last resort measure. The fact is that we are the world's biggest gas exporter, and we have gas affordability and reliability issues in Australia. So one of the big things we've got to address is, if we've got so much gas, and we do, why aren't we getting it out of the ground and getting it into the hands of Australian businesses and households? So that's one thing. So that mechanism we talked about, last resort, nobody really wants to go there, but it's now being talked about, not so much in hushed tones anymore. What can government do? They've got to provide some short-term relief for businesses and households, particularly the most vulnerable. It won't come cheap. This is not going to end quickly. This is not a one-day scenario. This has been coming for a while. It's been sped up by Russia, Ukraine, difficulties with our ageing coal-fired power stations, maintaining supply, the onset of winter, a whole range of factors here. But it's going to be with us structurally for a long time to come. So government's got to get together, federal, state, with energy retailers, suppliers and business to try to work through some relief measures here. What we're talking about is relief for businesses, or else those hard decisions are going to come quite quickly and nobody wants to be in a position to make them. You put interest rates, inflation on top of all of that. It's pretty choppy waters as we work through this energy transition. We all know, Kieran, where it's going, towards renewables. We can't do it all at once. The renewable base isn't ready to pick up the slack yet. We've just got to work our way through it and relieve as much pain as possible on the way through.
Peter Dutton says the Liberal Party is estranged from big business. What do you make of the way he characterised his opening comments as becoming the Liberal leader?
I heard him say that, Kieran, and certainly, look, we represent business, large, small and medium, and the fact is that all businesses have to work together. There are supply chains. You know, little businesses, small businesses supply into bigger ones. Businesses provide contracts for smaller ones. There's an ecosystem, as they say. They're all linked. You know, look, there's been a lot of issues over the past few years that have been difficult for business and government. Industry would have liked the federal government to be more courageous on workplace relations. Now it becomes a circle of, does industry talk up and then get beaten up for talking up? We just work with the government of the day. It's the same on energy and climate. That's where investment's going. It's where shareholders are going. It's where customers are going. It might not be quite what the previous government wanted to hear, but that's the reality that we work with. But we have to work through the transition. I don't see any estrangement at all. I look forward, on behalf of our members, to working very closely with the opposition and with the government to get the best policy outcomes. I mean, business has to work with the government of the day and should work with the government of the day, and the government of the day should work with business. I would just say to all political parties, if we don't have a strong business sector, we don't have the jobs, we don't have the growth, we don't have the economic creativity that we need. Business is the engine room of the country, large and small, and I think it's very hard to divorce larger and smaller businesses from each other. They all have to work together, and we would hope government and opposition would work with both.
And a couple of quick ones to finish. What would be a reasonable increase in the minimum wage in your view?
Well, Kieran, the inflation rate's been at 5.1%. Underlying inflation is 3.7%. We don't know what it will do next. It's sort of is it a spike or is it more prolonged? We don't yet know. We've put forward a 2.5% increase in the minimum wage, plus the 0.5% superannuation guarantee, take into account 1.3% of measures for low and middle income earners through the last federal budget. That equates to about 4.3% when you all add it up. Any increase in the minimum wage flows up. It flows up through workplaces. It flows to people not just on the minimum wage, but on minimum wages on awards. It's about a quarter of the workforce straight away. It's not inconsequential. Yeah. Business is facing, as we just talked about, enormous cost pressures at the moment. Households are also facing pressures. We all get that. The secret sauce here is productivity. Any wage increase to be sustainable, so it doesn't impact employment or investment, has to be come with it significant productivity gains. Wage increases just don't grow on trees. A last point I'd make, Kieran, is there's a lot happening in business that isn't reflected in the wage price index. Businesses are often paying 10, 20, 30% more to workers to retain them because of labour shortages. These are productive workers or highly valued workers. That's not showing up in the data, nor are bonuses or incentives or all of those things that businesses are desperately pulling levers to try to keep staff. So it's not as bleak as is made out in terms of the wages outcome, but any wage increase has to be sustainable, or else it will just put people out of work.
Ines, I only got 20 seconds left, but the Jobs Summit the Prime Minister wants to host, are you optimistic of landing a deal as part of those talks with the unions and the business community more broadly?
Hope so, Kieran. We're looking forward to it in September or so. Want to be willing and constructive contributors. It's got to cover productivity, got to cover all that's involved in that. IR, migration, skills education, training, tax infrastructure, all of that plays a part. You can't just make one sort of bargain around one part of the system, be it awards or casuals or enterprise bargain. We've got to have a holistic approach. I think it'd be great to have the conversation, and I hope that we do get some very solid outcomes of it. We need it.
Ines Willox, I appreciate the conversation today. Thank you as always.